The carriage door slammed shut like a coffin lid. Clara Whitmore pressed her gloved hand against the rain-streaked window, watching her childhood disappear into London's fog. In 3 days, she would marry a man she'd never met, a duke they whispered about in drawing rooms, a widower whose first wife died under circumstances no one dared discuss aloud. Her guardian had made it clear, accept this arrangement or face ruin. So here she sat, 20 years old, sold like livestock to a stranger's cold estate. But Clara had learned something her guardian never expected. Sometimes the most dangerous choice is also the only one that lets you survive. If you're watching from New York, Tokyo, Paris, or anywhere else this story finds you, stay until the end, hit that like button, and tell me in the comments what city you're in so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. It hammered against the carriage roof in relentless sheets, turning the roads into rivers of mud that sucked at the wheels and slowed their progress to a crawl. Clara sat rigid against the leather seat, her traveling cloak damp despite her best efforts, her fingers numb inside thin gloves that had seen better seasons. Across from her, Mrs. Pemberton snored softly, her jowls trembling with each breath. The old woman had been assigned as chaperone, a formality, really, since Clara's fate had already been sealed 3 weeks ago in her guardian's study, over brandy she wasn't offered and documents she wasn't allowed to read thoroughly. She closed her eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. It never did anymore. Her father had been dead for 42 days. Pneumonia, the doctor said, though Clara suspected it was really despair that killed him. After her mother's death 5 years prior, he'd simply faded. Like a sketch left too long in sunlight. The estate, mortgaged beyond redemption. The debts, staggering, and Clara, unmarried at 20 with no dowry and no prospects, had become a problem to be solved. Enter her Uncle Bernard, her father's half-brother, who'd arrived at the funeral with appropriate condolences and inappropriate haste. Within a week, he'd installed himself as her guardian. Within 2, he'd announced her engagement. The Duke of Blackmore has made a generous offer, Bernard had said, not quite meeting her eyes. You should be grateful, Clara. A girl in your position cannot afford to be particular. She'd asked to meet the Duke first. Bernard had laughed, as if she'd suggested something charmingly naive. His Grace does not involve himself in such trivialities. The settlement has been agreed upon. The wedding will take place at Blackmore Manor. You'll leave London on the 15th. And if I refuse? Bernard's smile had vanished. Then I will exercise my legal authority to commit you to an institution for your own protection. Grief has clearly unbalanced your mind, my dear. I'm sure the doctors at Bethlehem would agree. The threat had been clear. Bedlam. Madness. A living death far worse than any marriage could be. So Clara had made her choice, or rather, had her choice made for her. The carriage lurched violently, throwing her against the side panel. Mrs. Pemberton jerked awake with a snort. Are we there yet? The old woman mumbled, squinting into the darkness beyond the windows. I don't know, Clara said quietly. But she did know. She could feel it, that peculiar heaviness in the air that comes when you're approaching something irrevocable. The landscape had changed over the last hour, growing wilder and more desolate. The neat hedgerows and cultivated fields of the south had given way to rough moorland and twisted trees that clawed at the sky like arthritic fingers. Then, through the rain, she saw it. Blackmore Manor rose from the cliff tops like something carved from darkness itself. Not a welcoming country house with warm lights in the windows, but a fortress, all gray stone and sharp angles, perched on the edge of the world with nothing but churning sea and jagged rocks below. Lightning split the sky behind it, and for just a moment the entire structure was silhouetted in white fire. Clara's breath caught. Cheerful place, Mrs. Pemberton muttered, crossing herself. The carriage rattled through iron gates that shrieked in the wind, up a long drive lined with skeletal oaks. The house grew larger with each turn of the wheels, more imposing, more impossible. By the time they reached the front entrance, Clara felt as if she were being swallowed whole. A servant appeared with an umbrella, but the wind immediately turned it inside out. Rain lashed at Clara's face as she stumbled from the carriage onto gravel that crunched like broken teeth. Her skirts were soaked within seconds, clinging to her legs and making each step an effort. The front door opened. A tall, severe woman in black stood in the entrance, backlit by the dim glow of the foyer. Her face was all sharp planes and disapproving lines. Her gray hair pulled so tightly it seemed to stretch her skin. "Miss Whitmore," she said. Not a greeting, just an acknowledgement of fact. "I am Mrs. Graves, the housekeeper. You are late." "The roads," Clara began. "His Grace does not tolerate tardiness. Come inside before you flood the entrance hall." It wasn't hospitality so much as an order. Clara obeyed, stepping into a cavernous space that smelled of old stone and beeswax and something else, something faintly medicinal that made her nose wrinkle. The foyer was grand in the way mausoleums are grand. High ceilings disappeared into shadow. Dark wood paneling absorbed what little light the wall sconces provided. A staircase swept upward in a curve, its banister polished to a cold gleam, and it was silent. Not the comfortable silence of a house at rest, but the oppressive quiet of a place where sound itself had learned to be afraid. "Mrs. Pemberton will be shown to the guest wing," Mrs. Graves announced, gesturing to a waiting maid. "You, Miss Whitmore, will come with me. His Grace wishes to see you immediately." Clara's stomach tightened. "Now? But I'm—" "Now," Mrs. Graves repeated, brooking no argument. They climbed the stairs in silence, Clara's wet skirts leaving a trail of water on the carpet runner. The second floor was no more welcoming than the first. A long corridor lined with portraits of stern-faced aristocrats who seemed to judge her with oil-painted eyes. She caught glimpses of rooms through half-open doors. A library with more books than she'd ever seen, a music room with a pianoforte draped in cloth, a sitting room where the furniture was covered like corpses awaiting burial. Mrs. Graves stopped before a heavy oak door at the end of the corridor. "His Grace's study," she said. Then, with something that might have been warning or might have been malice, "Do not keep him waiting." She knocked twice and opened the door without waiting for a response. The study was warmer than the rest of the house, a fire burning in the grate and casting restless shadows across the walls. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves crammed with leather-bound volumes. A massive desk cluttered with papers. And behind that desk, rising from a leather chair, was the Duke of Blackmore. Adrian Blackmore was not what she'd expected. She'd imagined someone old. Bernard had mentioned the Duke was a widower, and she'd pictured a white-haired relic desperate for an heir. But the man standing before her couldn't have been more than 35. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of winter seas, gray-blue and just as cold. His face was handsome in a severe way, all hard lines and sharp edges, with a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. He studied her with the same detachment one might examine a horse at auction. "Miss Whitmore," he said. His voice was deep, cultured, absolutely devoid of warmth. "You're soaked." "The weather is irrelevant. We have business to discuss." He gestured curtly to the chair opposite his desk. "Sit." Clara's temper flared. She was exhausted, wet, and frightened, and this man was treating her like an inconvenient delivery. But she forced herself to remain calm. She crossed the room with as much dignity as her sodden skirts would allow, and sat. The Duke resumed his own seat, steepling his fingers beneath his chin. "I assume your guardian explained the terms of our arrangement," he said. "He explained that I had no choice." One dark eyebrow lifted slightly. "Honesty, how refreshing." He pulled a document from the stack on his desk. "Nevertheless, we should be clear. This is a marriage of convenience, nothing more. You require protection and a name. I require legitimacy, an end to certain rumors." "About your first wife," Clara said before she could stop herself. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The Duke's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those cold eyes, something dangerous. "What have you heard about my first wife?" His voice was very quiet. Clara's mouth had gone dry, but she'd already spoken, and retreating now would only make her seem weak. "That she died, that the circumstances were unclear." "The circumstances," the Duke said slowly, "were tragic. Isabel fell from the cliffs behind the house during a storm. Her body was recovered 2 days later." He paused. "Anything else you wish to know?" "Did you love her?" The question surprised them both. The Duke's jaw tightened. "That," he said icily, "is none of your concern. This marriage will be a legal arrangement, Miss Whitmore. You will have your own rooms, your own allowance, and the freedom to manage the household as you see fit. In return, you will conduct yourself appropriately, avoid gossip, and make no demands upon my time or attention beyond what is absolutely necessary. And if I want more than that, then you will be disappointed. He stood signaling the end of the conversation. The wedding will take place in 3 days. Mrs. Graves will provide you with everything you need. Do not wander the house unaccompanied. Do not enter the West Wing under any circumstances. And do not under any circumstances go near the cliffs. Is that understood? Clara rose on unsteady legs. You make it sound like a prison. It is what you make of it, the Duke replied. But understand this. I did not invite you here out of affection or desire. You are a solution to a problem, nothing more. If you accept those terms, we will deal well enough together. If you cannot— He left the threat unfinished. Clara lifted her chin. I understand perfectly, Your Grace. Good. He rang a small bell on his desk. Mrs. Graves will show you to your rooms. Dinner is at 8. You need not attend tonight. It was a dismissal. Clara turned toward the door, but stopped with her hand on the handle. Your Grace? Yes? Why did you agree to this marriage? If you want nothing from me, why accept my uncle's proposal? For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, because Miss Whitmore, a widower living alone in a house where his wife died, mysteriously attracts exactly the kind of attention I cannot afford. A new wife, a living wife, silences those whispers. You give me respectability, I give you survival. It's a fair exchange. Is it? Clara asked softly. But the Duke had already turned back to his papers, and she knew she wouldn't get another answer. Mrs. Graves led her through more endless corridors to a suite of rooms in the East Wing. The bedroom was large and well-appointed. 4-poster bed with heavy curtains, a writing desk by the window, a wardrobe that could have housed a family of 4. But it was cold, impersonal, like a room in an expensive hotel. Your things will be unpacked shortly, Mrs. Graves said. Ring if you need anything. Breakfast is at 7, luncheon at 1, dinner at 8. His Grace expects punctuality. Is there anyone else in the house? Clara asked. Besides the servants? Mrs. Graves' expression flickered. The Duke's grandfather, Lord Philip, resides in the North Wing. He is quite elderly and unwell. You are not to disturb him. I wasn't planning to disturb anyone. See that you don't. The housekeeper moved toward the door, then paused. A word of advice, Miss Whitmore. This house has its own rhythms, its own rules. You would be wise to learn them quickly and not to question what you don't understand. And if I do question? Mrs. Graves smiled, though there was no humor in it. Then you may find yourself as unhappy as the last Duchess. She left before Clara could respond. Alone, finally, Clara sank onto the edge of the bed and let herself shake. Not from cold, though she was freezing. From the sheer weight of where she was and what she'd agreed to. 3 days until the wedding. 3 days until she became the Duchess of Blackmore, wife to a man who looked at her like a contract to be signed, mistress of a house that felt more like a tomb than a home. She stood and crossed to the window, pulling back the heavy curtain. Rain still lashed against the glass, and beyond it she could see nothing but darkness and the faint white foam of waves crashing against rocks far below. What had Isabel seen, she wondered, when she looked out these windows? What had she thought in those final moments before the fall? Clara let the curtain drop. She would not think about that. Would not let fear paralyze her. She had survived her mother's death, her father's decline, Bernard's threats. She would survive this too, even if survival meant marrying a stranger in a house full of ghosts. The next 3 days passed in a blur of fittings and preparations that felt more like being dressed for a funeral than a wedding. A seamstress appeared from the village, a nervous woman who took Clara's measurements in silence and disappeared again. Mrs. Graves presented her with a collection of the previous Duchess's belongings that had been stored for safekeeping. Clara stood in her bedroom, staring at the gowns laid across her bed. Beautiful things, silk and velvet in jewel tones, lace collars and pearl buttons. But wearing a dead woman's clothes felt like an omen she couldn't ignore. These were Isabel's? She asked the maid who'd brought them. The girl, young, maybe 16 with frightened eyes, nodded quickly. Yes, miss? Mrs. Graves says they'll fit you well enough until your own things can be made. What was she like? The first Duchess? The maid's face went pale. I shouldn't say, miss. Please, I'm going to be living here. I should know. She was beautiful, the maid whispered, glancing at the door as if afraid Mrs. Graves might materialize. And kind. She used to bring us treats from the village, talk to us like we were people, not just servants. But she was sad, always sad. And near the end, she stopped, swallowing hard. Near the end, what? She stopped leaving her room, said she didn't feel safe, that someone was watching her. His Grace thought it was nerves, but the girl's eyes filled with tears. The night she died, I heard her screaming that someone was trying to hurt her. But by the time we got there, she was already gone. Fallen from the cliffs, they said. Clara's blood ran cold. Did anyone see what happened? Dr. Reeves was the first to find her. He's the family physician. He said it must have been an accident, that she'd been sleepwalking maybe, or confused. But her eyes, miss. When they brought her back, her eyes were open, and she looked terrified. A sharp knock at the door made them both jump. Mrs. Graves stood in the doorway, her expression thunderous. Mary, get back to the kitchens, now! The maid fled. Mrs. Graves turned her cold gaze on Clara. I would advise against encouraging servants to gossip, Miss Whitmore. It leads to all manner of unpleasantness. I was just asking. The late Duchess's death was thoroughly investigated and ruled accidental. Dredging up painful memories serves no purpose except to distress His Grace and spread malicious rumors. She paused. You would do well to remember that. After she left, Clara stood very still, her heart hammering. Isabel had been afraid, had died screaming, and no one seemed to want to talk about why. Mods. The wedding took place in the Manor's private chapel, a small stone building attached to the main house by a covered walkway. No guests, no celebration, just Clara in a borrowed dress, white silk that had belonged to Isabel altered to fit, the Duke in formal black, a minister who recited the vows with mechanical efficiency, and Mrs. Graves as witness. The ceremony lasted 11 minutes. When the minister pronounced them man and wife, the Duke did not kiss her. He simply nodded once, signed the registry, and left the chapel without a word. Clara stood there in the empty chapel, the gold ring heavy on her finger, and wondered if she'd just made the worst mistake of her life. The wedding breakfast was equally grim. A formal meal served in the dining room with the Duke at one end of the long table and Clara at the other. So far apart they might as well have been in different rooms. He read correspondence throughout the meal, occasionally making notes, never once looking at her. When the plates were cleared, he stood. I have business in the village, he announced. I'll return this evening. You may do as you please, provided you observe the restrictions I outlined. And he was gone. Clara sat alone in that vast dining room, surrounded by portraits of dead Blackmores, and felt the first real stirrings of anger. She had agreed to a marriage of convenience. She had expected coldness. But this complete indifference, this absolute refusal to even acknowledge her existence beyond what was legally required, this was insulting. She was not a piece of furniture to be installed and ignored. Rising from the table, she made a decision. If the Duke would not tell her about this house, she would discover its secrets herself. She started in the library. It was easier than she'd expected to slip away from the servants' watchful eyes. They were busy with their own duties, and no one seemed particularly interested in tracking the new Duchess's movements. Clara found the library on the second floor, a magnificent room with walls of books stretching up 2 stories, accessible by a wrought iron spiral staircase. She spent the afternoon there, pulling down volumes on the Blackmore family history. What she found was revealing. The Blackmores had been powerful once, advisors to kings, landowners with holdings across 3 counties. But the last century had not been kind to them. Bad investments, scandal, a series of early deaths. The Duke's father had died in a riding accident when Adrian was only 12. His mother had followed within the year, influenza, the record said, though the date seemed oddly convenient. Adrian had inherited at 13, raised by his grandfather and a series of cold tutors. He'd married Isabel Thornwood at 28, a love match, according to the society pages Clara found tucked into one of the volumes. Beautiful, wealthy, connected. They'd seemed happy. And then, 3 years later, Isabel was dead. The official account called it a tragic accident. But the more Clara read, the more questions arose. Why had Isabel been outside during a storm? Why had no one heard her fall? Why had the inquest concluded so quickly? She was so absorbed in her research that she didn't hear the footsteps until they were right behind her. "You should not be here." Clara spun around, nearly dropping the book she was holding. A man stood in the library entrance, tall, thin, with graying hair and the demeanor of someone accustomed to authority. He wore a physician's black bag over one shoulder. "I'm sorry," Clara said, straightening. "I didn't realize the library was forbidden." "It is not forbidden," the man said, stepping into the room. "But perhaps unwise for someone so new to the household." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I am Dr. Reeves, the family physician. You must be the new Duchess." "Clara," she said automatically, then cursed herself for the informality. "Clara." He said her name slowly as if tasting it. "How lovely." His Grace did not mention you were so young. Something in his tone made her skin crawl. "I'm 20, quite old enough to be married." "Oh, I'm sure." He moved closer, his gaze traveling over her in a way that made her want to step back. "I knew the previous Duchess quite well. She was young too, and curious like you, always asking questions. What happened to her?" The question came out sharper than Clara intended. Dr. Reeves' expression shifted, something dark flickering across his features. "A terrible accident. She was not well, you understand. Troubled. Melancholic. I tried to help her, but some ailments resist even the best medical care." "She was ill?" "Deeply so. Toward the end, she was quite unstable, seeing things that weren't there, making wild accusations." He sighed. His Grace was devastated, of course. He did everything possible to save her. Claire's grip tightened on the book. "The maid said Isabel was screaming the night she died, that she said someone was trying to hurt her." The doctor's face went very still. "Servants gossip. They embroider tragedies into scandals. You should not listen to such talk, Your Grace." "But the late Duchess," he said firmly, "suffered from severe hysteria complicated by possible poisoning, accidental, of course. She had been taking various tonics and remedies, some of which interacted poorly. It affected her mind, made her paranoid. The night she died, she fled her rooms in a state of delusion and fell from the cliffs. It was thoroughly investigated. The matter is closed." He said it with such finality that Clara knew she was meant to accept it without question. But something in his eyes, something calculating and cold, told her there was far more to the story. "I should return to my rounds," Dr. Reeves said, already turning toward the door. "A pleasure to meet you, Your Grace. I'm sure we'll see much of each other. I visit weekly to attend to Lord Philip, and of course, I'm available should you yourself require any medical attention." The way he emphasized the last word sent a chill down Clara's spine. After he left, she stood in the library for a long moment, her mind racing. Isabel had been sick, seeing things, taking medicines, or had she? What if the doctor had been lying? What if Isabel hadn't been mad at all? What if someone had wanted her to appear mad? Clara set the book aside and left the library, a new determination settling in her chest. She would find out what really happened to Isabel Blackmore, and she would make damn sure the same thing didn't happen to her. That night, unable to sleep, Clara wrapped herself in a dressing gown and ventured into the corridors. The house was different at night, shadows deeper, sounds amplified. Every creak of wood, every gust of wind against the windows seemed laden with menace. She told herself she was being foolish, that grief and exhaustion were making her imagine dangers that didn't exist. But then she heard it, crying, soft, muffled, coming from somewhere above her. Clara froze, her heart hammering. The sound was unmistakable, a woman weeping as if her heart would break. She followed it through the corridors, up another flight of stairs, into a part of the house she hadn't yet explored. The crying grew louder, more desperate, and then it stopped. Clara stood in an empty hallway, breathing hard, staring at a closed door at the end of the corridor. Isabel's rooms. She knew it somehow, with that bone-deep certainty that requires no proof. Her hand was on the doorknob before she could talk herself out of it. The room beyond was dark, curtains drawn, furniture covered in dust sheets. But there, on the writing desk by the window, was a leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. Clara picked it up with trembling hands and opened to the first page. The handwriting was elegant, feminine. May 3rd, 1871. Today I became the Duchess of Blackmore. I should be happy. So why do I feel like I've entered a beautiful prison? Clara's breath caught. Isabel's diary. She sank into the desk chair and began to read, and with each page the terrible truth became clearer. Isabel had been afraid, had been made to feel like she was losing her mind, had suspected someone was poisoning her, someone close, someone she should have been able to trust. And the last entry dated the night she died. He knows I know. I tried to tell Adrian, but he won't listen. He thinks I'm mad. Perhaps I am. Perhaps that's what they want. But if anything happens to me, if I don't survive this night, let it be known. I was murdered, and the killer is... The entry ended there, the final word unfinished, ink smudged as if the pen had been dropped suddenly. Clara sat in the darkness, Isabel's diary clutched against her chest, and understood with terrifying clarity. This house held a killer, and she had just married into his reach. Clara didn't sleep that night. She sat at the desk in Isabel's abandoned room until dawn broke gray and cold over the cliffs, reading through the diary 3 times, memorizing passages, searching for the name that had never been written. The killer could be anyone. The Duke himself, cold, distant, who'd shown not a flicker of genuine emotion since she'd arrived. Dr. Reeves, with his calculating eyes and 2 smooth explanations. Mrs. Graves, who moved through the house like a warden guarding secrets. Even the servants, silent and watchful, loyal to something Clara couldn't see. By the time pale light crept through the curtains, she'd made a decision. She wouldn't confront anyone directly. Not yet. That's what had gotten Isabel killed. Instead, she would do what her predecessor couldn't. She would find proof. She slipped the diary into the deep pocket of her dressing gown and returned to her own rooms just as the house began to stir. The maid who brought her morning tea found her sitting by the window, already dressed, looking every inch the composed Duchess. "Good morning, Mary," Clara said, keeping her voice steady. The girl bobbed a curtsy, her eyes still red-rimmed from crying. She'd been the one who'd warned Clara, the one who'd heard Isabel screaming. "Morning, Your Grace. Will you be taking breakfast in your room?" "No, I'll join the Duke in the dining room." Clara paused, then added casually, "I had trouble sleeping last night. Old houses make such strange noises, don't they?" Mary's hands trembled as she poured the tea. "Yes, Your Grace. The wind, mostly. It comes off the sea something fierce." "Of course. Though I could have sworn I heard crying, a woman's voice." Clara watched the girl's face carefully. "You didn't hear anything unusual, did you?" The teacup rattled in its saucer. Mary set it down quickly, not meeting Clara's eyes. Sometimes the maids say they hear things, but Mrs. Graves says it's just the wind through the chimneys, playing tricks. "What do you think?" Mary looked up then, and Clara saw real fear in her young face. "I think some houses remember their sorrows, Your Grace, and this house has more than most." Before Clara could press further, footsteps echoed in the corridor. Mary's face went pale. She curtsied hastily and fled, leaving Clara alone with her cooling tea and a growing certainty that everyone in this house was terrified of something. The Duke was already seated when Clara entered the dining room, hidden behind a newspaper, his breakfast untouched. He didn't lower the paper when she sat down. "Good morning," Clara said. No response. She poured herself coffee from the silver service, the sound of liquid hitting porcelain unnaturally loud in the silence. A footman served her eggs and toast. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, Clara spoke again. "I explored the house a bit yesterday. I hope that's acceptable." The newspaper rustled but didn't lower. "As I said, you may do as you please within the boundaries I established. I found the library. It's remarkable. My grandfather's collection. He was a scholar before his health declined. I'd like to meet him." The newspaper came down with a sharp snap. The Duke stared at her, his expression unreadable. "That's not possible." "Why not? I'm told he lives in the North Wing. Surely a brief introduction." "My grandfather is dying, Miss Whitmore. He is heavily medicated and rarely lucid. Visitors disturb him." "It's Your Grace now, not Miss Whitmore," Clara said quietly. "We are married, remember?" Something flickered in those cold eyes. Surprise, maybe, or irritation. "My grandfather is not to be disturbed. That is final." "And the West Wing? Why is that forbidden?" The Duke's jaw tightened. He set down his newspaper with careful precision and Clara suddenly understood that his composure was not indifference, it was control. Rigid, absolute control over emotions that ran much deeper than his surface showed. "You have been here less than a week," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Yet you seem determined to test every boundary I've established. Why?" Clara met his gaze without flinching. "Because boundaries without explanation feel less like protection and more like secrets. And this house, Your Grace, is full of secrets. Every old house has secrets. Not every old house has a duchess who died screaming that someone was trying to kill her." The words hung in the air like smoke. The Duke went very still, his face draining of color. "Who told you that?" he asked finally. "Does it matter? It's true, isn't it?" He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "My wife died in an accident. Anything else is servants' gossip and malicious speculation. I suggest you occupy yourself with more suitable pursuits than listening to ghost stories." "Isabel kept a diary," Clara said, the words out before she could stop them. The Duke froze halfway to the door. When he turned back, his expression was no longer merely cold. It was dangerous. "What did you say?" Too late to retreat now. Clara lifted her chin. "I found it. In her room. She wrote about feeling watched, about someone making her sick, about trying to tell you and not being believed. The last entry was the night she died. She said she was being murdered." "Where is this diary?" "Safe. Hidden where it can't be destroyed, like I'm certain someone tried to destroy it before." It was a lie. The diary was in her rooms, tucked beneath her mattress. But Clara gambled that the Duke wouldn't know that. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, looming over her. Clara's heart hammered, but she didn't flinch. "You," he said softly, "are playing a very dangerous game. I'm trying to stay alive. By making wild accusations? By dredging up painful memories?" His hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. Isabel was unwell. Her mind was fractured by illness and medication. Nothing she wrote in those final weeks can be trusted. Or, Clara said, she was being poisoned, deliberately, to make her seem mad so that when she died, everyone would believe it was an accident or suicide. Convenient, isn't it? The hysterical Duchess throws herself off a cliff, and no one asks questions. The Duke's face twisted with something that might have been anguish. "You know nothing. Nothing about what happened, about what I—" He stopped, breathing hard. "Stay out of this. For your own safety, stay out of this." "Is that a threat?" "It's a warning." He released the table, stepping back, reassembling his composure like armor. "Whatever you think you've discovered, whatever theories you're constructing, they will only bring you harm. Let the past remain buried. Even if it means letting a killer go free?" "There is no killer," he said flatly. "There is only tragedy and grief, and a house full of people who should learn to mind their own business." He moved toward the door, then paused. "I'm traveling to London on business. I'll be gone a week. Dr. Reeves will check on you daily to ensure you're settling in well. I suggest you use the time to adjust to your new position rather than playing detective." He left before Clara could respond, the door closing behind him with an ominous finality. She sat alone in the dining room, her breakfast forgotten, and felt the trap closing around her. The Duke was leaving. Dr. Reeves, who Isabel's diary had mentioned with fear and suspicion, would have free access to her, and she'd just announced that she had evidence of murder. She'd been an idiot, a reckless, stupid idiot. The sound of carriage wheels on gravel drew her to the window. She watched the Duke's coach pull away, disappearing down the long drive toward the main road, and felt utterly alone. She needed an ally, someone in this house who wasn't complicit in whatever had happened to Isabel. Mary. The young maid had been kind, had tried to warn her. If Clara was careful, if she didn't push too hard. She found the girl in the laundry room, up to her elbows in soapy water, scrubbing sheets with a determination that spoke of desperation to stay busy. "Mary," Clara said softly, closing the door behind her, "I need your help." The girl's eyes went wide. "Your Grace, I can't. Mrs. Graves said I'm not to speak with you about Isabel. I know." Clara moved closer, lowering her voice. "But she's dead, Mary, and I don't want to end up the same way. You think—" Mary's face crumpled. "You think someone killed her?" "I think she was afraid, and I think she was right to be afraid. Please, if you know anything at all that might help me understand what happened." Mary looked at the door, then back at Clara, warring with herself. Finally, she whispered, "The night the Duchess died, I saw Dr. Reeves coming from her rooms earlier that evening. He had his medical bag, said he'd been giving her something to help her sleep. But Her Grace, she looked strange when I brought her dinner tray. Glassy-eyed like. Couldn't hardly hold her fork. She kept saying someone was in the room with her, watching her, but there was nobody there." "What happened then?" "Dr. Reeves came back around midnight, said she'd called for him, that she was having fits. He sent us all away, said he'd sit with her. And then," Mary's voice broke. "Then we heard the screaming. By the time we got there, the doctor was at the cliff edge shouting that she'd thrown herself over, that he'd tried to stop her, but she was too quick." "Did anyone actually see her fall?" Mary shook her head. "Just Dr. Reeves. He said she ran past him in her nightdress, straight for the edge. But, Your Grace, I've been thinking about it all this time, and it don't make sense. Why would she run toward the cliffs? They terrified her. She never went near them, not even in daylight." Clara's mind raced. "Who found the body?" "Fisherman, 2 days later. Dr. Reeves identified her, said the fall had, well, that she wasn't fit for viewing. The Duke never saw her body. The funeral was closed casket." "Did anyone question any of this? The Duke, surely he must have—" "His Grace was in London when it happened," Mary said. "Business trip. Dr. Reeves sent word, but by the time he got back, it was all over. The inquest, the funeral, everything. Dr. Reeves handled it all. Said he was sparing the Duke additional grief." How convenient, Clara thought. How terribly, perfectly convenient. "Mary, who else knew Isabel well? Who might have seen or heard something?" The girl bit her lip. "There's old Thomas, the groundskeeper. He's worked here 40 years, knew the family before the Duke was even born. If anyone knows the secrets of this place, it's him. But he keeps to himself mostly, lives in the cottage near the stables." "Thank you," Clara said. "You've been incredibly brave." "Your Grace." Mary caught her sleeve, her grip surprisingly strong. "Be careful, please. This house, it eats people. Good people. Don't let it eat you too." Clara found old Thomas exactly where Mary had said, in a weathered stone cottage that smelled of tobacco and leather, mending a bridle by the light of a single lantern despite the morning sun outside. He looked up when she knocked, his face creased with age and weather, eyes sharp as a hawk's. "Duchess," he said, not standing. "Wondered when you'd come asking questions." "How did you—" "Same reason the last one did. House talks, if you listen. And you got that look about you. The look that says you're not the type to sit pretty and keep quiet." He gestured to a rough wooden chair. "Might as well sit. This'll take a while." Clara sat, her heart hammering. "What can you tell me about Isabel? Sweet girl. Too good for this place. Too good for what happened to her." Thomas set aside the bridle, his weathered hands still. "I knew from the start something was wrong. She'd come to the stables sometimes, just to get away from the house. Said it made her feel trapped. Said she kept getting sick, headaches and stomach pains, but the doctor's medicines only made it worse." "Dr. Reeves was treating her?" "Oh, aye. Treating her for everything under the sun. Nerves," he said. "Female hysteria. Prescribed her tonics and powders. Had her taking them 3 times a day. She told me once they made her feel like she was floating outside her own body. Made her see things that weren't there." Clara's blood ran cold. "The diary mentioned poison. Do you think—" "I think," Thomas interrupted, his voice hard, "that Dr. Reeves has been the physician to this family for 30 years. I think he was here when the Duke's mother died suddenly, when the Duke's father had his accident, when the old lord's health started failing. I think a lot of people have died in this house while under Dr. Reeves's care, and not many questions get asked because he's the one writing the death certificates." The room seemed to tilt. "You're saying he's killed multiple people?" "I'm saying I'm an old man who's seen too much and knows when to keep his mouth shut if he wants to keep breathing." Thomas leaned forward. "But you're asking, so I'll tell you this. The doctor's got influence. Money troubles of his own, or did until a few years back. Suddenly he's flush, building a new surgery in the village, taking holidays abroad. And every time someone dies in this house, there's a generous donation made to his practice." "Someone's paying him," Clara breathed. "But who? The Duke?" Thomas shook his head. "His Grace was just a boy when his parents died. And he was in London when Isabel went over those cliffs. But there's one person who's been here through it all. One person who controls the household, who decides what the Duke knows and doesn't know, who had access to Isabel every day. Mrs. Graves, Clara whispered. Housekeeper's been with this family 40 years, loyal to one person and one person only, the old lord, Lord Philip. And Lord Philip, Thomas's expression darkened. He's a hard man. Cruel, some would say. He wanted heirs for the Blackmore name, wanted the line continued. The Duke's first marriage was arranged by him, but Isabel couldn't conceive. Year after year, no children. And Lord Philip, well, he decided she was useless, a burden. The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. So he had her killed, had Dr. Reeves poison her slowly, make it look like madness, then staged her death as suicide. Can't prove it, but Isabel knew. Toward the end, she tried to tell the Duke, but Lord Philip got to him first, told him she was hysterical, unreliable. The Duke loved her, I think, in his way, but he loved his grandfather more, trusted him more. And now Lord Philip is dying, Clara said slowly, but first he arranged another marriage. To me. Why? Thomas's look was pitying. You're young, healthy, from good stock, I'd wager. Lord Philip wants an heir before he dies, wants to ensure the Blackmore line continues. Whether the Duke loves you or not doesn't matter. You're a vessel, nothing more. And if I can't give him an heir, or if I become inconvenient... Thomas didn't answer. He didn't need to. Clara stood on shaking legs. I need to see Lord Philip. I need to confront him. Girl, that's suicide. He's got Mrs. Graves, Dr. Reeves, probably half the staff in his pocket. You go making accusations, you'll be the next one found at the bottom of those cliffs. Then what am I supposed to do? Wait to be poisoned? Pretend I don't know my life is in danger? You're supposed to run, Thomas said bluntly. Take what money you can and disappear before they decide you're more trouble than you're worth. Clara thought of her uncle, of the asylum he'd threatened her with, of being dragged back to London in disgrace, penniless and disgraced. She'd escaped one trap only to fall into another. I can't run, she said. I have nowhere to go. Then you'd better get smart and get evidence. Real evidence. Not just old diaries and the word of servants. Something that would hold up if this ever went to authorities. How? Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then, the old lord keeps records. Everything. Ledgers, correspondence, contracts. If there's proof of payment to Dr. Reeves, it'll be in his study. But he never leaves his rooms, and Mrs. Graves watches him like a hawk. Where's his study? North wing, 3rd floor, but I'm telling you, getting in there is... I'll find a way, Clara said. She had to. She spent the rest of the day planning, watching the household rhythms, noting when servants moved through which corridors, when Mrs. Graves made her rounds. The north wing was indeed heavily guarded. She counted 4 servants who seemed to have no purpose except to lurk in its hallways. But everyone had to sleep eventually. Near midnight, Clara dressed in dark clothing and slipped from her rooms. The house was quieter at night, but not silent. The wind was relentless, rattling windows and moaning through chimneys, perfect cover for any noise she might make. She moved through the corridors like a ghost, barefoot on cold stone, her heart in her throat every time a floorboard creaked. The north wing was darker than the rest of the house, lit only by a few guttering candles and wall sconces. She was halfway down the corridor when she heard voices. Clara pressed herself into a doorway alcove, hardly daring to breathe. Can't keep increasing the dosage, Dr. Reeves was saying, his voice tight with stress. Another week at most, then questions will be asked. Then make it look natural. Mrs. Graves' cold tone was unmistakable. The old lord is 93. No one will be surprised. And the girl? Leave her to me. She's already making herself useful by asking the wrong questions. One more unfortunate accident, and we'll find the Duke a more suitable bride, one who understands her place. Clara's blood turned to ice. We agreed no more deaths for at least a year, Dr. Reeves hissed. Isabel was risky enough. Another duchess dead under mysterious circumstances will be explained as her predecessor's ghost driving the poor thing to madness, Mrs. Graves interrupted. Really, doctor, where's your imagination? These romantic young women are so susceptible to suggestion. A few strange sounds in the night, some carefully placed items from the late duchess, perhaps some medication to help with her nerves. Her laugh was like breaking glass. She'll be begging to leave within a month. And if she proves stubborn, well, the Cliffs have claimed one duchess. They can claim another. Their footsteps were moving closer. Clara looked around frantically. Nowhere to hide, no way to retreat without being seen. A hand clamped over her mouth, yanking her backward through a door she hadn't noticed. She tried to scream, to fight, but the grip was iron strong. The door closed silently just as Mrs. Graves and Dr. Reeves passed by. Clara was spun around in the darkness, her attacker's hand still firmly over her mouth. "Don't scream," a voice whispered. Male, young, unfamiliar. "I'm on your side. I'm going to remove my hand now. If you scream, we're both dead. Understand?" Clara nodded. The hand withdrew. In the faint moonlight filtering through a grimy window, she could make out her rescuer. A young man, maybe 25, with ink-stained fingers and intelligent eyes. He wore simple clothes, a servant's attire, but carried himself with the confidence of someone used to thinking, not just obeying. "Who are you?" Clara breathed. "David, Lord Philip's secretary, or I was until he became too ill to need one." He glanced at the door. "They're gone, but we need to move. There's a servant's stair at the end of this corridor. It'll take us—" "I'm not leaving. I need to get into Lord Philip's study." David stared at her. "You're mad. You heard them. They're planning to kill you." "Which is exactly why I need evidence. Financial records. Anything that proves Dr. Reeves is being paid to murder people." Clara grabbed his arm. "You worked for Lord Philip. You know where he keeps his private papers." Yes, but..." "Then help me, please. I'll die anyway if I don't expose them. At least this way I have a chance." David's jaw worked. Finally, he nodded. "The study's locked, but I still have my keys. Lord Philip's in his bedroom. He rarely wakes before dawn anymore. If we're quick..." They moved swiftly through the servants' passages, narrow corridors designed to let staff move unseen. David led her to a small, nondescript door that opened into a richly appointed study lined with bookshelves and filing cabinets. "Financial records are here," David whispered, pointing to a large mahogany desk. "But they're coded. Lord Philip never trusted anyone completely." Clara began rifling through drawers, pulling out ledgers, scanning entries by the light of David's shielded candle. Columns of numbers, names, dates, nothing immediately incriminating. Then she found it. A separate ledger hidden in a false bottom of the bottom drawer. Inside, payments listed in clear notation. J.R. Medical Services, followed by dates that aligned exactly with family deaths. The Duke's mother, his father, Isabel. And beneath each payment, a note in the same spidery handwriting. "Service rendered satisfactorily." "This is it," Clara breathed. "This is proof." "Then take it and let's go," David urged. But Clara's attention had been caught by another document, a letter, folded and sealed with the Blackmore crest. She broke the seal, her hands shaking. It was dated 3 months ago, addressed to her Uncle Bernard. "The arrangement is acceptable. The girl will suffice for our purposes. Payment will be rendered upon confirmation of pregnancy. Should she prove as troublesome as the previous Duchess, alternative measures have been prepared." The signature was Lord Philip's. Clara's vision swam. "My uncle sold me. Not to save me from poverty. He sold me to be bred like livestock and then disposed of." "Your Grace!" A floorboard creaked behind them. They spun to find Mrs. Graves standing in the doorway, a pistol in her hand, her face a mask of cold fury. "How disappointing," she said. "I had hoped you'd be more sensible than Isabel, but I see you're cut from the same foolish cloth." David stepped in front of Clara. "Mrs. Graves, put down the gun. This has gone far enough. You always were too soft, David. Too moral for this work." The pistol didn't waver. "The old lord was right to dismiss you. Can't trust a man with a conscience." "You won't shoot us," Clara said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Too much noise, too many questions." Mrs. Graves smiled. "Who said anything about shooting you here? No, I think a murder-suicide is far more tragic. The young Duchess, driven mad with grief and jealousy over her husband's dead wife, kills the loyal secretary who tried to stop her, then throws herself from the cliffs in remorse. Dr. Reeves will confirm she'd been showing signs of instability. The household staff will testify to her erratic behavior. It will all be very sad and very believable." She gestured with this pistol. "Move. Toward the servants' stairs. Try to run, and I'll shoot you in the legs. You'll still die, just more slowly." Clara's mind raced. The ledger was still clutched in her hand, evidence that could destroy them all. If she could just get it to someone, anyone outside this house. Now, Mrs. Graves barked. They moved. Through the corridors, down the narrow stairs, Mrs. Graves always 3 paces behind, the pistol trained on Clara's back. Clara could feel David trembling beside her, could sense his mind working just as frantically as hers for a way out. They emerged from the house through a servant's entrance, into the teeth of a rising storm. Rain lashed at them, and the wind was so strong Clara had to fight to stay upright. The cliffs were ahead, the sound of waves crashing against rocks audible even over the howling wind. "Keep walking," Mrs. Graves shouted over the storm. This was it. The same route Isabel must have been forced down. The same terrible ending. "I won't," Clara said, stopping. She turned to face Mrs. Graves, clutching the ledger to her chest. "You'll have to shoot me right here, and then you'll have to explain why the new Duchess has a bullet in her back." "Don't be stupid," Mrs. Graves snarled, moving closer. "Give me that ledger, and I might make this quick." "Or," Clara said, "I could throw it over the cliff. Let the sea have it. Then you'll have killed us for nothing." For just a second, Mrs. Graves' attention flickered to the ledger. David saw his chance. He lunged, grabbing for the pistol. The gun went off with a deafening crack that cut through even the storm's roar. David cried out, stumbling, blood blooming across his shoulder. Clara screamed and ran, not toward the house but along the cliff edge, the ledger still in her hand. If she could just reach the stables, reach Thomas. Mrs. Graves was faster than she looked. She caught Clara at the cliff's very edge, fingers like talons in her hair, yanking her backward. Clara's feet slipped on wet grass. For one terrible moment, she teetered on the edge, could see the churning water far below, could feel the pull of gravity and certain death. Then her hand closed around a rock. She swung it with all her strength. The impact made a sickening crunch. Mrs. Graves staggered, the pistol falling from her fingers, her hands going to her bleeding temple. She stumbled backward, her eyes wide with shock. And her foot found only air. Clara watched in frozen horror as Mrs. Graves fell, her scream cut short by the wind, her body disappearing into the darkness below. Clara collapsed to her knees in the mud, shaking so violently she couldn't stand. The ledger pressed against her chest. David crawled toward her, his face white with pain, his shoulder still bleeding. "You did it!" he gasped. "You actually did it!" But Clara wasn't listening. She was staring at the cliff edge, at the place where Mrs. Graves had vanished, and all she could think was, "I killed her. I killed someone." Even if it was self-defense, even if the woman had been a murderer, Clara had taken a life. Behind them, lights were appearing in the manor windows, servants shouting. Someone had heard the gunshot, and somewhere in that house, Dr. Reeves was still alive, still free, still dangerous. Clara forced herself to her feet, helped David up. They staggered toward the house together, the ledger still clutched in her bloody hands. This wasn't over, not by a long way. But for the first time since arriving at Blackmore Manor, Clara felt something other than fear. She felt rage. And rage, Clara was discovering, had a clarifying effect. The servants who'd rushed out at the sound of the gunshot stopped dead when they saw her, soaked to the bone, covered in mud and blood that wasn't hers, eyes blazing with something that made grown men take a step back. "Get Dr. Reeves," she commanded, her voice cutting through the wind. "Now." "Your Grace, what happened?" One of the footmen started. "Mrs. Graves tried to murder me. She's dead. This man needs medical attention, and if any of you value your positions, you'll do exactly as I say." Clara's grip tightened on the ledger. "Someone fetch old Thomas from the stables, and wake Lord Philip. Tell him the new Duchess demands an audience." They scattered like leaves. Clara helped David into the house, leaving a trail of muddy water across Mrs. Graves' immaculate floors. A bitter satisfaction curled in her chest at the thought. Mary appeared, her face white with shock, and helped settle David in one of the drawing rooms. Clara pressed a clean cloth to his shoulder wound. The bullet had gone clean through, which was either very lucky or very unlucky, depending on what happened next. "Keep pressure on it," she told David, whose teeth were chattering from shock and cold. "Don't let anyone give you anything to drink except water. No medicine, no tonics, nothing until I know who we can trust." "The servants," David started, "are terrified and have been complicit through silence. I don't know who Mrs. Graves had in her pocket." Clara's hands were steadier than she felt. "But we're about to find out." Dr. Reeves arrived within 10 minutes, his medical bag in hand, his expression carefully arranged into concern. He stopped short when he saw Clara. "Your Grace, they said there was an accident." "Mrs. Graves is dead," Clara said flatly. "She fell from the cliffs after attempting to shoot both myself and Mr. David here. Before she fell, she mentioned your name quite extensively." The color drained from the doctor's face. His eyes darted to the ledger on the table beside Clara, and she saw the moment he recognized it. "I don't know what you think you've discovered," he began, his voice tight, "but I assure you—" "Save it!" Clara stood, drawing herself up to her full height. She was shorter than him, younger, weaker in every physical sense. But she'd killed tonight. In self-defense? Yes, but she'd still watched a woman fall to her death, and something in her had fundamentally changed. "You've been poisoning members of this family for years. You murdered the Duke's parents, you murdered Isabel, and you've been slowly killing Lord Philip while collecting payments from him for your services." "Preposterous," Dr. Reeves said, but sweat beaded his forehead. "The ravings of a hysterical woman. I have the financial records, detailed payments, dates, and your signature on receipts for services rendered. I also have Isabel's diary, which documents her symptoms and names you specifically as the one administering medicine that made her worse." Clara picked up the ledger. "Shall I read some of the entries aloud, or would you prefer to tend to David's wound while I decide whether to hand you over to the magistrate or simply let the Duke deal with you when he returns?" The doctor's face had gone from pale to gray. His hands trembled as he set down his bag. "You don't understand," he said hoarsely. "Lord Philip, he's not a man you refuse. He wanted heirs, wanted the family name continued without the burden of unsuitable wives. I only did what I was paid to do." "You murdered people for money." "I eased suffering," Dr. Reeves snapped, some of his composure cracking. "The Duke's mother was already dying of consumption. His father was a drunk who would have destroyed the estate. Isabel was barren, 3 years and not a single pregnancy. She was useless to the family line." Clara's vision went red. She was a person, a living, breathing woman with thoughts and feelings and a life ahead of her, and you poisoned her, drove her mad with your treatments, and then staged her death as suicide. "She jumped," Dr. Reeves insisted. "At the end, she was so distraught, so confused. She was dragged to those cliffs and pushed. Mrs. Graves all but confessed it before she died." Clara moved closer to him, close enough to see the desperation in his eyes. "You're going to write down everything, every death, every payment, every conversation with Lord Philip, and then you're going to sign it. And if I refuse, then I'll tell everyone in the county that you've been murdering patients for profit. Your practice will be ruined, your reputation destroyed. You'll hang either way, doctor, but at least this way, some truth comes out." Dr. Reeves looked at David, bleeding on the couch, then back at Clara. Whatever he saw in her face made him flinch. "Fine," he whispered. "But first let me tend to his wound. I may be many things, but I'm still a physician." Clara watched him like a hawk as he cleaned and bandaged David's shoulder, noting every movement, every bottle he pulled from his bag. When he reached for a vial of clear liquid, she snatched it from his hand. "What is this?" "Laudanum, for the pain." "No," Clara set it aside. "Whiskey will do. We have plenty." Dr. Reeves' jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He finished the bandaging in tense silence, then sat at the writing desk Clara indicated and began to write. His hand shook, and twice he stopped as if he might refuse, but Clara's presence, still covered in Mrs. Graves' blood, still holding that damning ledger, seemed to drain any fight from him. It took an hour. When he finally set down the pen, his confession ran to 7 pages of close-written script detailing 15 years of murder for hire. Clara read every word, her stomach churning. Not just the Duke's parents and Isabel, a cousin who'd challenged the inheritance, a business partner who'd discovered financial irregularities, a servant who'd seen too much. The list went on, each death carefully orchestrated to look natural, accidental, or the result of existing illness. "You're a monster," she said quietly when she'd finished. "I'm a businessman," Dr. Reeves replied, all pretense of dignity gone. "And now you've destroyed me. I hope you're satisfied." "Not yet," Clara folded the confession carefully. "But I will be." A commotion in the hallway announced the arrival of old Thomas, and behind him, to Clara's shock, the Duke himself. Adrian Blackmore stood in the doorway, his traveling cloak still dripping rain, his face haggard as if he'd ridden through the night. His eyes swept the scene. David bandaged and pale, Dr. Reeves hunched in defeat, and Clara standing in the center of it all like an avenging angel in ruined clothes. "What in the hell is going on?" he demanded. Clara met his gaze steadily. "Your housekeeper tried to kill me tonight. She's dead. Your physician has been murdering your family for years on your grandfather's orders, and I have proof of all of it." The Duke went very still. "Explain, now." So she did. Every detail, from finding Isabel's diary to tonight's confrontation on the cliffs. She showed him the ledger, the confession, told him about the payments and the careful poisonings. With each revelation, the Duke's expression grew darker, more terrible. When she finished, he turned to Dr. Reeves with a look of such cold fury that the doctor actually whimpered. "You killed my mother," the Duke said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You killed my father. You killed Isabel." "Lord Philip ordered," Dr. Reeves began. "I don't care if the devil himself gave the order," Adrian roared, the careful control finally shattering. "You murdered my wife. You let me believe—" His voice broke. He looked at Clara, and for the first time she saw real emotion in those winter eyes, anguish, guilt, and a rage that matched her own. "You let me believe I'd failed her, that I hadn't protected her, hadn't listened when she tried to tell me she was in danger." "You didn't listen," Dr. Reeves said bitterly. "You believed me instead of her. You signed the papers declaring her mentally unfit. You let me increase her medications. Her blood is on your hands as much as mine." The Duke moved so fast Clara barely saw it. His fist connected with the doctor's jaw with a crack that echoed through the room. Dr. Reeves went down hard, blood streaming from his mouth. "Adrian, don't," Clara said sharply, though part of her wanted to let him continue. "He's not worth hanging for." The Duke stood over the fallen physician, his chest heaving. "He deserves to die." "He does, but not by your hand. Let the law deal with him." Clara touched his arm gently. "We have evidence, real evidence. He'll hang legally." Adrian looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since he'd arrived. Took in her disheveled state, the blood on her clothes, the fierce determination in her eyes. "You did all this," he said wonderingly. "You uncovered everything, confronted them, survived. I had help." Clara gestured to David, who'd been watching the exchange with wide eyes. "And I got lucky. If Mrs. Graves had been a better shot—" "Don't." Adrian's hand closed over hers, warm despite the cold that seemed to permeate the house. "Don't diminish what you did. Isabel tried to fight and died for it. You fought and won. Mrs. Graves is still dead by my hand. Mrs. Graves was a murderer who tried to kill you. You defended yourself." His grip tightened. "You have nothing to feel guilty for." But Clara did feel guilty, felt the weight of it pressing on her chest like stones. She'd killed someone tonight. That knowledge would live in her forever, justified or not. "We need to secure Dr. Reeves," she said, pulling herself together. "And then I need to see your grandfather." Adrian's expression hardened again. He orchestrated all of this. Every death, every payment. "I know. And he's going to answer for it." Clara straightened her shoulders. "But first, I want to hear him admit it. I want to know why." The north wing was silent when they reached it, the servants having fled when the shooting started. Adrian led the way to his grandfather's bedchamber, Clara close behind, with old Thomas bringing up the rear. Dr. Reeves they'd left locked in the cellar under guard by two stable hands Thomas trusted. Lord Philip's room was oppressively hot, a fire roaring in the grate despite the season. The air reeked of sickness and medicine and something else, the sweet, sour smell of decay. The old man lay in a massive four-poster bed, propped up on pillows, his face so gaunt it was almost skeletal, but his eyes were alert, sharp, and they fixed on Clara with something that might have been amusement. "So," he rasped, his voice like dried leaves, "the new Duchess has some spine after all. I wondered if you'd simply die quietly like Isabel." "You murdered her," Clara said, moving closer to the bed. "You had her poisoned because she couldn't give you an heir." "I removed an obstacle," Lord Philip corrected. "The Blackmore line must continue. That is all that matters. Isabel was weak, barren, useless. You, however," his gaze raked over her, "young, healthy, from proven breeding stock. Your uncle assured me your mother bore 4 children before her death. You'll do nicely. Clara's hands clenched into fists. I'm not livestock. You're whatever I say you are. You married into this family. You belong to us now. The old man's smile was a death's head grin. Bear Adrian a son, and you may live. Fail, and well, accidents happen. Adrian, Clara said without looking away from Lord Philip, did you know about any of this? No. The Duke's voice was hollow. I swear to you, I knew nothing. He didn't need to know, Lord Philip said. Soft-hearted boy. Too much like his mother. If he'd known the truth about her death, about his father, he'd have done something foolish. Better to keep him ignorant and focused on duty. Adrian made a sound like a wounded animal. You killed my parents. You killed my wife. You were going to kill Clara, only if necessary, the old man interrupted. Really, Adrian, think. Without my intervention, this family would have died out. Your father was a wastrel who would have gambled away the estate. Your mother was sickly and expensive. Isabel was barren. I did what had to be done to preserve our legacy. You murdered them, Adrian's voice cracked. They were people, not chess pieces. They were Blackmore's. And Blackmore sacrificed for the family. I did. Your great-grandfather did. Now it's your turn. Lord Philip's breathing was labored now, each word an effort. You'll thank me when you hold your son, when the line continues. The line can rot in hell, Adrian said savagely. Along with you. For the first time, something like fear flickered in the old man's eyes. You wouldn't. I'm your grandfather, your blood. You're a murderer, and you'll face justice for it. Lord Philip laughed, a wet, rattling sound. Justice? Boy, I'm dying. Dr. Reeves gave me 3 months at most. You think I care about your justice? He coughed, blood flecking his lips. I'll be dead before any trial. But the damage is done. You're married. The girl will bear children because she has no choice. The Blackmore legacy continues, and I win. Clara stepped forward, her voice ice cold. You win nothing. I'll bear no children for this family. I'll seek an annulment based on fraud. The marriage was arranged under false pretenses with intent to harm. I'll testify against you, against Dr. Reeves, against everyone involved. And when I'm done, the Blackmore name won't be a legacy. It'll be a warning. The old man's face twisted with rage. You can't! The contract is void if obtained through criminal conspiracy. Clara pulled the ledger from her coat. Which this proves quite thoroughly. You don't win, Lord Philip. You lose everything. Then you'll die, the old man hissed. I still have resources, people loyal to me. You think you're safe because Mrs. Graves is dead? I have others. Adrian moved to the bedside, looming over his grandfather with an expression Clara had never seen on him before. Pure, undiluted hatred. Listen to me very carefully, he said softly. If anything happens to Clara, if she so much as trips on the stairs, I will make your final months a living hell. I'll cut off your medications. I'll remove every comfort. I'll make sure you die in agony, alone, unmourned. Do you understand? Lord Philip stared at his grandson, and whatever he saw there made him shrink back into his pillows. You've become hard, he whispered. Good. That's good. You'll need that hardness to lead this family. There won't be a family to lead, Adrian said. Not the way you built it. That ends tonight. He turned and walked out. Clara followed, leaving the old man sputtering threats and protests that faded into helpless coughs. In the hallway, Adrian leaned against the wall, his face in his hands. Clara could see him shaking. All this time, he said brokenly, my entire life he was killing anyone who got in his way, and I never knew, never suspected. He was careful, and you loved him. I should have seen he was your grandfather, the only family you had left after your parents died. Of course you trusted him. Clara hesitated, then placed a hand on his shoulder. This isn't your fault, Adrian. Isabel told me she was being poisoned. She begged me to believe her, and His voice cracked. I told her she was being hysterical. I increased her medications on Dr. Reeves' advice. I killed her as surely as if I'd pushed her off those cliffs myself. No. They killed her. They manipulated you, lied to you, used your trust against you. You're a victim too. Adrian looked at her, his eyes red-rimmed. How can you say that? I'm the Duke. I should have protected her. Should have protected you. Instead, I left you alone in this house full of murderers. And I survived, Clara said firmly. Because I'm not Isabel. I'm not delicate or trusting or willing to be quiet. I'm stubborn and angry, and I've already killed one person tonight, so I'm fairly certain I can handle whatever else this family throws at me. A sound escaped him, half laugh, half sob. You're terrifying, do you know that? Good. You should be terrified of me. Everyone should. Clara managed a weak smile. Now what do we do? Call the magistrate? Alert the authorities? We do both. But first, Adrian straightened, wiping his face. First we secure the house. If my grandfather has other people in his employ, they may try something desperate when they realize it's over. He was right. They spent the next hour systematically questioning every servant, cross-referencing their stories, identifying who'd been truly ignorant and who'd known more than they'd admitted. It was ugly work. 3 more servants confessed to being paid by Mrs. Graves to report on household activities. 2 admitted to helping administer medications they'd been told were harmless. 1 footman broke down completely and revealed he'd been the one to lure Isabel to the cliffs the night she died, though he swore he hadn't known she'd be killed. By dawn, they had a clear picture of the conspiracy, and it was worse than Clara had imagined. Lord Philip had been orchestrating deaths in the family for over 30 years. Not just immediate threats, but anyone who might dilute the bloodline, challenge his authority, or cost the estate money. The Blackmore family tree was littered with convenient accidents and sudden illnesses, all traceable back to the old man's obsession with legacy and control. The magistrate arrived at first light, accompanied by constables. They took Dr. Reeves into custody, read the confession and ledgers, interviewed witnesses. The doctor was in chains and on his way to jail by noon. Lord Philip they couldn't arrest. He was too ill to be moved. Instead, a constable was posted outside his door, and a physician from the next county was summoned to monitor his condition and ensure he received no visitors. He'll likely die before trial, the magistrate told Adrian grimly. But we'll proceed with the investigation regardless. The record must be set straight. Clara stood at the window of the drawing room, watching the constable's carriage disappear down the drive. David sat nearby, his arm in a sling, looking exhausted but alive. It's over, he said quietly. It's actually over. Not quite. Clara turned from the window. There's still the question of what happens next, to the estate, to the servants who were complicit, to... She looked at Adrian, who stood by the fireplace, staring into flames that had long since died to embers. To us. The Duke had barely spoken since the magistrate left. Now he looked up, his expression unreadable. You can leave, he said. I'll arrange for an annulment. Your uncle's fraud invalidates the contract. You'll receive a settlement, enough to live independently. You don't have to stay here. Clara studied him. The proud, cold man she'd married was gone. In his place was someone raw, broken, struggling with guilt and grief and the weight of terrible knowledge. And if I want to stay? She asked. Adrian's eyes widened. Why would you? This place is cursed. Everyone who comes here dies or wishes they had. You've seen what my family is capable of. Your grandfather's family, Clara corrected, not yours. You didn't know. You were manipulated and lied to. That's not the same as being complicit. I should have known. Should have questioned, investigated. You were a child when your parents died. A young man when you married Isabel. You had no reason to suspect the people you trusted. Clara crossed the room to stand before him. But you know now. And what you do with that knowledge, that's what defines you. Adrian looked down at her and she saw something shift in his expression. You don't have to stay. You don't owe me anything. I know I don't. But maybe I'm not staying for you. Maybe I'm staying because this house needs to be cleaned out. Because the servants who are victims need protection. Because the truth needs to be told properly. She paused. And because despite everything, I think you're a good man who's been surrounded by monsters his entire life. Someone should show you what it's like to be treated with honesty. Clara! The door burst open. Mary stood there, her face white with terror. Your Graces, come quick! It's Lord Philip, he's... They ran. The north wing was in chaos. Servants clustered in the hallway, the constable shouting for order. The door to Lord Philip's bedchamber stood open. Inside, the old man lay sprawled half out of bed, his eyes open and staring, foam flecking his lips. An empty vial lay on the floor beside him. The physician from the next county knelt beside the body, then looked up at Adrian and Clara with a grave expression. Poison, he said. Self-administered, I'd wager. He must have had it hidden. Lord Philip had taken the coward's way out. Clara felt nothing, no satisfaction, no relief, not even anger, just a hollow emptiness where emotion should be. He knew he'd lost, David said from the doorway. Knew he'd hang or die in prison. So he chose his own end. Typical, Adrian said bitterly. Even in death, he had to control the narrative, had to have the last word. The constable was already making notes, calling for the magistrate to be informed. The physician began his examination, documenting the scene. Clara turned away from it all and walked to the window. Outside, dawn was breaking properly now, pale light spilling over the cliffs and the churning sea below. The same cliffs where Isabel had died, where Mrs. Graves had fallen, where Clara herself had nearly been pushed. This house had consumed so many lives, twisted so many fates, all in service to one old man's obsession with legacy. Well, that legacy was dead now. Died with Lord Philip and his poison and his carefully documented crimes. What came next? That was up to the living to decide. Clara felt Adrian's presence beside her before he spoke. They stood in silence for a long moment, watching the sun rise over the scene of so much death. I'll understand if you leave, he said finally. After everything you've been through, stop offering me an escape, Clara interrupted. I'm not running, not from you, not from this house, not from the mess your grandfather left behind. Then what are you going to do? Clara turned to face him fully. I'm going to help you rebuild. We're going to drag every secret into the light, compensate the families of the victims, make amends where we can. We're going to turn this house from a tomb into something better. And we're going to do it together, as partners. Not as a marriage of convenience, but as two people who've survived hell and came out the other side. Adrian stared at her. You can't possibly want to stay married to me. Why not? You're not your grandfather, you're not responsible for his crimes, and frankly, Clara managed a tired smile. You're the only person I know who's seen me at my absolute worst and didn't run screaming. That's got to count for something. You killed someone tonight. So did you, in a way. We're both stained now. Might as well be stained together. For the first time in days, Adrian almost smiled. That's possibly the least romantic proposal I've ever heard. Good thing I'm not proposing romance. I'm proposing partnership, honesty, a chance to build something that isn't based on lies and manipulation. Clara extended her hand. What do you say, Your Grace? Are you brave enough to start over? Adrian looked at her hand, then at her face. Whatever he saw there seemed to make a decision for him. He took her hand. I think, he said quietly, that you might be the bravest person I've ever met. And if you're willing to stay, if you're willing to give this a chance, then I'd be a fool to refuse. Then it's settled. Clara's grip tightened on his. We face this together. Behind them, the physician was calling for servants to help move Lord Philip's body. The constable was sealing the room as a scene of investigation. The business of death and justice was proceeding with bureaucratic efficiency. But Clara didn't care about any of that right now. She was focused on the man in front of her, on the fragile connection forming between them. Built not on romantic fantasy or legal obligation, but on shared trauma and the desperate human need to believe that something good could still come from so much darkness. Clara, Adrian said, his voice rough. Thank you. For staying. For fighting. For... He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. For being here when I felt like the entire world had turned into a lie. You're welcome, Clara said simply. They stood together as the sun climbed higher, burning off the night's terrors, and for a moment, just a moment, Clara let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they'd actually survive this. Then she heard the footsteps in the corridor, running, urgent. Thomas burst into the room, his weathered face twisted with alarm. Your Graces, he panted. You need to see this, now! They followed him down to the cellars, to the locked room where they'd left Dr. Reeves under guard. The door hung open. The guards lay unconscious on the floor, and Dr. Reeves was gone. Clara stared at the empty cell, her exhaustion evaporating in a rush of cold fury. One of the guards was starting to come around, groaning and clutching his head where a visible lump was forming. What happened? Adrian demanded, kneeling beside the man. Someone hit me from behind, the guard mumbled. Didn't see who. 1 minute I was watching the door, next thing I'm on the floor. How long ago? Clara asked sharply. Thomas checked the other guard's pulse, then looked at the cold remains of a candle on the floor. Can't be more than an hour, maybe less. An hour. Dr. Reeves had an hour's head start, and he knew this countryside better than any of them. He could be anywhere by now, hiding in the village, fleeing to London, or worse, gathering allies for one final desperate play. "We need to alert the constable," Adrian began, but Clara was already shaking her head. "The constable left 2 hours ago. By the time we send word and he mobilizes a search, Reeves could be halfway to Scotland." She turned to Thomas. "You know this area. Where would he go?" The old groundskeeper's face was grim. "He's got a surgery in the village, but that's the first place anyone would look. Smart man like him, he'd head for the coaching inn on the North Road. Get a horse, ride hard for the next county before anyone knows he's gone." "Then we go after him," Clara said. "Clara, no," Adrian started. "He has nothing to lose now," she interrupted, her voice sharp with urgency. "Lord Philip is dead. Mrs. Graves is dead. His confession is in the magistrate's hands. He's a desperate man, and desperate men are dangerous. If we don't catch him now, he'll disappear. And all those murders, all that evidence, means nothing if the man who actually committed them is never brought to justice." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Then I'll go." "You've been through enough." "We go together, or I go alone," Clara said flatly. "Your choice, Your Grace." For a moment she thought he'd argue. Then something shifted in his expression, recognition maybe that she meant every word. "Together then," he said. "Thomas, have horses saddled, fast ones." They rode hard through the breaking dawn. Clara in borrowed men's clothing that one of the stable hands had provided, far more practical for riding than any dress. The rain had stopped, but the roads were still treacherous with mud, and twice Clara's horse nearly stumbled. She held on grimly, refusing to slow down. David had insisted on coming despite his wounded shoulder, and Thomas rode with them as guide. 4 of them against 1 man, but that 1 man had killed more people than Clara could count, and she had no illusions about what he'd do if cornered. They reached the coaching inn just as full daylight broke across the moors. A weathered building that had seen better days, it sat at a crossroads where the coastal road met the highway north. A handful of horses were tethered outside, and smoke rose from the chimney. "His horse is there," Thomas said quietly, pointing to a distinctive gray mare. "He's inside." Clara's heart hammered. "Then we've got him." "Or he's got us," David muttered. "Man could have a pistol, could take hostages." Could, Clara said impatiently. She dismounted, her legs shaky from the hard ride. "We don't have time for caution. Every minute we wait is another minute he could slip away." Adrian caught her arm as she moved toward the inn. "Let me go in first. If he's armed, then we all go in together," Clara said firmly. "Stop trying to protect me, Adrian. I'm not fragile." "I'm aware," he said dryly. "You proved that when you killed my housekeeper and extracted a confession from a serial murder in the same night. But you're also swaying on your feet from exhaustion, and I'd rather not add your death to the list of things I have to feel guilty about." Despite everything, Clara felt her lips twitch. "Fine. We go in together. But I'm not staying behind." The inn's common room was dim and smoky, populated by a handful of early travelers nursing breakfast and ale. They looked up when Clara and the others entered, and she saw curiosity turn to wariness as they took in the group's disheveled, urgent appearance. The innkeeper, a stout woman with sharp eyes, moved to intercept them. "Help you folks? We're looking for a man," Adrian said, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of nobility. "Dr. Reeves. Middle-aged, dark hair, would have arrived within the last hour." The woman's expression shuddered. "Don't know anyone by that name." "He's riding a gray mare," Thomas added. "Horse is outside right now. We saw it." "Lots of gray horses in the world." "We know he's here," Clara interrupted, stepping forward. "And we know he's a fugitive. He's wanted for murder. Multiple murders. If you're sheltering him, you're complicit." The innkeeper's face went pale. "Murder? I don't want trouble." "Then tell us where he is." A crash from upstairs answered the question. Clara was moving before anyone could stop her, taking the stairs 2 at a time despite her exhaustion. Behind her, she heard Adrian curse and follow. The upper floor was a narrow hallway with several doors. One stood ajar, and through it Clara could see Dr. Reeves shoving clothing into a satchel with frantic haste. He looked up as she burst in, and his face twisted with rage. "You!" he snarled. You've destroyed everything. You destroyed yourself, Clara shot back. You and your greed and your willingness to murder innocent people for money. Innocent? Dr. Reeves laughed bitterly. None of them were innocent. The Duke's father was a drunk who beat the servants. His mother was bleeding the estate dry with her expensive tastes. Isabel? His face contorted. Isabel was the worst. So sweet, so gentle, always treating the staff like equals. She would have ruined the family reputation, turned the manor into some sort of charity house. Lord Philip was right to want her gone. So you poisoned her, Clara said, feeling Adrian arrive behind her, hearing his sharp intake of breath. Slowly, methodically, until she was so sick and confused she didn't know what was real anymore. It was supposed to look like a decline, but Dr. Reeves said, his eyes wild now. A gradual wasting illness. But she fought, kept trying to get better, kept asking questions. So we had to accelerate the timeline. Mrs. Graves and I, we took her to the cliffs that night, told her we'd found something she needed to see, proof of who was poisoning her. She was so desperate, so hopeful. He laughed again, the sound cracking. She actually thanked us for helping her, right up until Mrs. Graves pushed her over the edge. But das ist bei ihm. Adrian made a sound like he'd been punched. Clara felt him move past her, his face a mask of devastation and rage. But she caught his arm. Don't, she said quietly. He wants you to lose control. Don't give him that. Listen to your wife, Dr. Reeves sneered. She's smarter than Isabel ever was. Isabel was weak. You're just vicious enough to survive, aren't you, Duchess? If by vicious you mean unwilling to be murdered quietly, then yes, Clara said coldly. And you're going to hang for what you did. To all of them. Dr. Reeves's hand moved to his coat pocket. Clara saw the glint of metal, a pistol, and threw herself sideways, pulling Adrian with her. The gun went off with a deafening crack, the bullet punching through the wall where Adrian's head had been a second before. Thomas and David burst into the room. Dr. Reeves tried to aim again, but Thomas was faster. The old groundskeeper's cane cracked across the doctor's wrist with brutal efficiency. The pistol clattered to the floor. Dr. Reeves dove for it. Clara was faster. She kicked the weapon away, and it skittered under the bed. When the doctor lunged after it, Adrian finally moved, tackling him to the floor with a violence that spoke of years of suppressed rage, finally finding a target. You killed her, Adrian said, his voice breaking as he pinned the doctor down. You killed my wife and made me think I'd failed her. You let me believe I was the reason she died. You were! Dr. Reeves spat blood, his face pressed against the floorboards. You were too weak to see what needed to be done. Too sentimental. Lord Philip knew. He knew you'd never have the stomach for what the family required. So he did it for you. We all did. And you were grateful for it, whether you knew it or not. Adrian's fist drew back and Clara saw murder in his eyes. She caught his arm. Adrian, stop. He deserves to hang publicly, with everyone knowing what he did. Don't let him make you into a killer too. Clara's voice was steady despite the trembling in her hands. You're better than that. Better than him. Better than your grandfather. Prove it. For a long, terrible moment, Adrian didn't move. Then, slowly, he released Dr. Reeves and stood, his breathing ragged. Tie him up, he said hoarsely to Thomas. We're taking him back to face proper justice. The ride back to Blackmore Manor was slower, more careful. Dr. Reeves, bound hand and foot and slung across his own horse like a sack of grain, cursed them the entire way. Clara ignored him. She was focused on Adrian, who rode in grim silence, his face carved from stone. When they finally reached the manor, the constable had returned, accompanied by the magistrate himself, a severe older man with iron-gray hair and the bearing of someone who'd seen every crime humanity had to offer. Your Grace, he said, bowing slightly to Adrian, we received word of Lord Philip's death. I came to... He stopped, seeing Dr. Reeves. You apprehended him. The Duchess did, actually, Adrian said, gesturing to Clara. I merely kept her from killing him herself. The magistrate's eyebrows rose as he took in Clara's disheveled state. Men's clothing, mud-splattered, hair escaping its pins but standing straight-backed and fierce-eyed. Did she now? He murmured. Then louder. Dr. Reeves, you are under arrest for murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and attempted murder. You will be held for trial at the assizes. As the constables hauled Dr. Reeves away, Still protesting and cursing, the magistrate turned to Clara and Adrian. "I'll need full statements from both of you, and from anyone else who can provide testimony." He paused, his stern expression softening slightly. "Your Grace, the Duchess, I mean. I understand you've been through a considerable ordeal. If you need time to rest before—" "No," Clara said firmly. "I'll give my statement now, while it's fresh. While I can still remember every detail of what these people did." The next hours were grueling. Clara recounted everything, finding Isabel's diary, the confrontation with Mrs. Graves, the ledgers, the confession, the attempt on her life. The magistrate's clerk wrote furiously, occasionally asking for clarification. Adrian gave his own statement, his voice hollow as he described his grandfather's confession and suicide. David and Thomas added their accounts. The servants who'd been complicit were questioned. By the time the magistrate was satisfied, it was late afternoon and Clara felt like she'd been wrung out and hung up to dry. "This will be one of the largest murder investigations in the county's history," the magistrate said, gathering his papers. "The trial will draw considerable attention. You should prepare yourselves for that." "Let it draw attention," Clara said. "Let everyone know what happened here. Let them see what Lord Philip Blackmore did in the name of legacy." The magistrate studied her with something like respect. "You're quite remarkable, Your Grace. Most women in your position would want this buried quietly." "Most women in my position would be dead," Clara replied. "I'm not interested in protecting the reputation of murderers." After the magistrate left, Clara found herself alone in the drawing room, staring at nothing. The house was eerily quiet. Most of the servants had been given the day off, and those who remained moved like ghosts, afraid to make noise. Adrian found her there as evening fell. "You should rest," he said quietly, standing in the doorway. "So should you." "I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see—" He stopped, his jaw working. "I see Isabel. The night before she died, she came to my study, begged me to believe her, said someone was trying to kill her, that the doctor was poisoning her, that my grandfather was behind it all. And I—" His voice cracked. "I told her she was being irrational, that grief over her inability to conceive was affecting her judgment. I actually suggested she take more of Dr. Reeves' medication to calm her nerves." Clara's heart ached for him. "You didn't know." "I should have. She was my wife. I should have protected her." "Adrian." Clara stood, crossing to him. "Your grandfather spent your entire life manipulating you, controlling information, isolating you, making you dependent on his judgment. You were a victim too." "I was a coward," he said bitterly. "Too afraid of conflict to question anything, too comfortable in my ignorance." "Then don't be a coward now." Clara met his gaze steadily. "You can't change what happened to Isabel, but you can make sure her death meant something. We can make sure all their deaths meant something." "How?" Clara had been thinking about this all day, even as she gave statements and answered questions. An idea had been forming, audacious, possibly foolish, but right in a way she couldn't quite articulate. "We rebuild," she said, "not just the house's reputation, but everything. We use the Blackmore wealth to help the families of the victims. We establish a fund for medical care in the village. Real medical care, not whatever the next corrupt physician might offer. We turn this manor from a monument to cruelty into something that actually serves people." Adrian stared at her. "You want to stay, after everything." "I want to stay and fix things," Clara corrected. "I want to prove that good can come from even the worst places. And I want—" She hesitated, then pushed forward. "I want to do it with you. Not because I'm obligated to, not because of some contract, but because I think we could actually be partners, equals, if you're willing." "Clara, you can't possibly—" "Stop telling me what I can't possibly do," she interrupted. "I've survived 2 murder attempts, killed a woman, tracked down a fugitive, and extracted confessions from multiple conspirators. I think I'm capable of deciding what I want." "And you want this?" Adrian gestured around them, at the house that had been the site of so much death. "You want this life? This burden?" "I want the chance to turn the burden into something worthwhile," Clara said. "And yes, I want you. Not the cold duke who tried to keep me at arm's length, but the man I saw today. The one who rode through the night to catch a murderer. The one who's grieving what he lost and trying to figure out how to move forward. That man I could build something with." Adrian's eyes searched her face, looking for doubt or deception. Whatever he saw made something in him break. He pulled her into an embrace, not romantic, not passionate, but desperate. The embrace of someone drowning who'd finally found solid ground. Clara held him as he shook, as the tears he'd been holding back finally came. She didn't offer platitudes or false comfort. She just held on, letting him grieve in a way he probably never had. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were red but clearer. "I don't deserve you," he said hoarsely. "Probably not," Clara agreed with a tired smile. "But you're stuck with me anyway. We're married, remember? Till death do us part, and I just fought too hard to stay alive to let death take me now." He laughed, actually laughed, a raw, broken sound. "You're insane." "So I've been told, is that a yes? To what exactly?" "To being partners. To rebuilding this place together. To actually trying to make this marriage into something real." Clara held out her hand. "To starting over, without the lies and manipulation and murder." Adrian looked at her hand for a long moment. Then he took it, his grip warm and solid. "Yes," he said simply. "To all of it." The next weeks were a whirlwind. The trial of Dr. Reeves drew crowds from 3 counties. Clara testified for 2 full days, recounting in precise detail every crime, every confession, every piece of evidence. The doctor's defense attempted to paint her as a hysterical woman driven by jealousy of her predecessor. But Clara's calm, thorough testimony, backed by ledgers, letters, and multiple witnesses, demolished that narrative. The jury took less than an hour to return a guilty verdict on all counts. Dr. Reeves was sentenced to hang. Clara didn't attend the execution. She'd seen enough death. Instead, she spent that morning in the Manor's neglected gardens, planning renovations with a landscape designer from London. The scandal of the Blackmore murders dominated newspapers for months, but gradually, another story began to emerge, of the young duchess who'd survived and was now transforming one of England's most notorious estates into a model of progressive reform. Clara established a medical clinic in the village, staffed by physicians from Edinburgh who came with impeccable references and no connections to the Blackmore family. She set up a fund to compensate the families of Lord Philip's victims. Not enough to truly make amends, but something. She also opened the Manor's extensive library to local scholars and created a girls' school in the East Wing, much to the horror of neighboring gentry. "You're making us look bad," the local earl complained at a dinner party 3 months after the trial. "Educating servants' daughters. What's next? Votes for women?" "Don't tempt me," Clara replied sweetly, and Adrian choked on his wine, trying not to laugh. Their marriage was still far from conventional. They maintained separate bedrooms, though Clara often found Adrian in the library late at night, and they developed a habit of talking until dawn about estate business, philosophy, and their respective childhoods. He was teaching her chess. She was teaching him to argue back instead of retreating into cold silence. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was friendship, respect, and a partnership built on shared trauma and shared purpose, which, Clara reflected, was more than most aristocratic marriages could claim. One evening, 6 months after the trial, Clara found a letter waiting for her on the hall table. Her Uncle Bernard's handwriting. She almost threw it in the fire unopened, but curiosity won out. "Clara, I have read the accounts of the trial with great interest. It seems you have made quite a name for yourself. I confess I did not expect such resourcefulness from someone I had written off as a burden. For what it's worth, I did not know the extent of Lord Philip's plans when I arranged your marriage. I knew only that he wanted a young, healthy bride for his grandson, and that he was willing to pay handsomely for one. Had I known the truth, well, perhaps I would have done the same regardless. I'm not a good man, Clara, you knew that. But you have become a remarkable woman. Your father would have been proud. I hope you can forgive me someday, though I suspect you won't. Regards, Bernard." Clara folded the letter carefully and fed it to the fire. She felt Adrian's presence behind her. "Your uncle?" he asked. "Trying to absolve himself of guilt," Clara said, watching the paper curl and blacken. "He doesn't get absolution from me." "Good." Adrian moved to stand beside her. "You're too generous with forgiveness as it is." "Am I?" Clara glanced at him. "I forgave you. I didn't kill anyone." "No, but you didn't believe Isabel when she needed you to. That must haunt you." Adrian's expression tightened. "Every day. Yet here we are, building something new, That counts for something. Clara turned from the fire. I've been thinking about the West Wing, the one that was always forbidden. What about it? I want to turn it into a memorial for Isabel and all the others who died because of your grandfather's obsession, a place where their stories are told truthfully, where visitors can understand what unchecked power and cruelty can do. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, then, she would have liked that. Isabel. She always wanted to help people, make a difference. This would give her death meaning. That's the idea. You're going to change the world, aren't you? Adrian said softly. One ruthless decision at a time. Clara smiled. I'm going to try. Are you going to help me? He extended his hand, the gesture that had become their ritual, their promise. Always, he said. Clara took his hand, and for the first time since arriving at Blackmore Manor, she felt something very much like hope. The house was no longer a prison. The servants no longer whispered in fear. The cliffs, while still dangerous, were no longer a place of murder, but just cliffs, beautiful in their way, dramatic and wild. And Clara, the girl who'd been sold into a marriage she never wanted, had become a duchess on her own terms. Not through birth or beauty or passive acceptance, but through sheer stubborn will to survive and then to transform survival into something more. She stood at the window that night, looking out over the ground she was slowly reclaiming from decades of darkness. Behind her, she heard Adrian moving through the library, shelving books they'd been discussing. Clara, he called, there's something here you should see. She turned from the window. What is it? He was holding an old leather journal, similar to the one she'd found of Isabel's. My grandfather's diary. I found it hidden in his desk when we were clearing out his papers. It goes back 40 years. Clara's breath caught. Have you read it? Some. It's... Adrian's face was pale. It's worse than we thought. There are others, other murders we don't know about. People who died decades ago, before Dr. Reeves was even involved. Clara crossed to him, taking the journal carefully. She opened it to a random page and read, The cousin asks too many questions about the ledgers. He cannot be allowed to examine the books too closely. An accident must be arranged. Her hands tightened on the leather cover. We need to give this to the magistrate. I know, but Clara... Adrian looked at her, and she saw fear in his eyes. This will mean more investigations, more scandal, more people knowing what my family was capable of. Good, Clara said firmly. Let them know. Let everyone know. The truth matters more than reputation. Even if it destroys us? We're not our ancestors, Clara said. Their crimes don't define us. Our response to those crimes does. She held up the diary. This is evidence. Justice for people who've been forgotten. We honor them by bringing the truth to light, no matter how ugly. Adrian nodded slowly. You're right. You're always right. Not always. But in this? Clara managed a small smile. Yes, this is right. This is... They stood together in the library, holding the evidence of decades of murder, and Clara felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. But she also felt Adrian's steady presence beside her, felt the strength they'd built together through crisis and revelation. They would face this new horror the same way they'd faced everything else, together, with honesty, refusing to hide from the truth no matter how terrible. Outside, dawn was breaking over Blackmore Manor. The same cliffs, the same sea, the same ancient stones, but different now. Cleansed, in a way, by truth and justice, and two people determined to build something better from the ruins of the past. Clara closed the diary and looked at Adrian. Tomorrow, we take this to the magistrate. Tonight, we remember that we survived, that we're still here, still fighting, still refusing to let darkness win. Tomorrow, Adrian agreed. He hesitated, then added, Thank you for staying, for being brave enough to see this through. Thank you for letting me, Clara said, for becoming the man who could stand beside me instead of the one who wanted to keep me at a distance. They stood in comfortable silence as the sun climbed higher, burning away the shadows, and Clara thought, We're going to be all right. Not perfect, not undamaged, but all right. It was enough, more than enough. It was a beginning, but beginnings, Clara was learning, required more than good intentions. They required action, persistence, and the willingness to face truths that others wanted to keep buried. The magistrate arrived the next morning, his expression grave as he accepted Lord Philip's diary. He spent 3 hours in the library, reading page after page, his face growing progressively more haggard. "This changes everything," he said finally, setting down the journal with hands that trembled slightly. "These names, some of these people died 30, 40 years ago. Their deaths were never questioned. But this," he tapped the leather cover, "this is a confession to murders that span decades." "Can anything be done?" Clara asked. "Most of the victims' families may not even know the truth." "Justice can still be served, even if delayed. We'll need to exhume bodies, re-examine death certificates, track down living relatives." The magistrate looked at Adrian. "Your Grace, this will devastate what remains of your family's reputation. There will be calls to strip your title, seize the estate. Let them try," Adrian said quietly. "I won't protect a legacy built on corpses." Clara felt a surge of pride. This was not the cold, distant man she'd married. This was someone who'd learned that honor meant facing consequences, not avoiding them. The magistrate departed with the diary, promising a full investigation. Within days, the story broke in every major newspaper from London to Edinburgh. The reaction was swift and vicious. Anonymous letters arrived by the dozen, some supporting Clara's courage, others accusing her of destroying a noble family for attention. The local gentry stopped calling. Invitations dried up. At church on Sunday, families who'd previously smiled and nodded now turned away. Clara sat in the Blackmore family pew, the same pew where generations of murderers had pretended piety, and felt the weight of hostile stares on her back. "They hate us," she murmured to Adrian as the vicar droned through his sermon. "They're afraid of us," Adrian corrected. "We've proven that secrets don't stay buried. That makes every family with skeletons in their closets nervous." "Good," Clara said. "Let them be nervous." But the isolation stung more than she'd expected. She'd known exposing the truth would have consequences, but she hadn't anticipated the loneliness that came with being both celebrated as a hero in the press and shunned as a troublemaker by her actual neighbors. Mary found her one afternoon in the garden, staring at nothing. "Begging your pardon, Your Grace," the young maid said hesitantly, "but there's a woman at the door, says her name is Catherine Wells. Says her brother died 20 years ago, and she's just learned it might not have been natural causes." Clara's head snapped up. "Show her in, to the drawing room." Catherine Wells was a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and work-worn hands. She clutched a worn letter, one of the notifications the magistrate had sent to families identified in Lord Philip's diary. "Your Grace," she said, her voice trembling, "they say my brother Thomas was murdered, that your husband's grandfather had him killed because he witnessed something he shouldn't have. Is it true?" Clara gestured for her to sit. "I believe so. Your brother's name appears in Lord Philip's diary. He wrote that Thomas had seen him falsifying estate records and needed to be silenced. The official cause of death was listed as drowning," Catherine whispered. "They said he got drunk and fell in the river, but Thomas didn't drink. Never touched spirits in his life. I told them that, but no one listened. Said I was just a grieving sister making excuses." "You were right to question it," Clara said gently. "Your brother was murdered, and you deserve to know the truth." Catherine's face crumpled. 20 years I've been living with the guilt. Thinking if I'd been a better sister, maybe I could have saved him. And all along, she broke off, sobbing. Clara knelt beside her chair, taking the woman's rough hands in her own. "It wasn't your fault. None of it was your fault. Will there be justice after all this time? The man who ordered the killing is dead, but his legacy, his fortune, that can still provide compensation. I'm establishing a fund for victims' families. It won't bring your brother back, but it's acknowledgement," Catherine said, wiping her eyes. "Someone finally admitting what was done to him. That's worth more than gold." Word spread. Within a week, Clara was meeting with a dozen families, each with a similar story, a death that never made sense, questions that were never answered, grief that had festered for years because the official story didn't match what they knew in their hearts. She listened to every story, took notes, promised to fight for each of them. And slowly, something unexpected happened. The same newspapers that had initially sensationalized the scandal began running different stories. Human interest pieces about the victims, about families finally getting closure, about a young duchess who could have buried the evidence and protected her husband's name, but chose truth instead. Public opinion began to shift. A letter arrived from the Women's Property Rights Association, inviting Clara to speak at their next meeting. Then another from a parliamentary reform group, a third from a medical ethics committee investigating physician misconduct. "You're becoming famous," Adrian observed one evening, sorting through the day's correspondence. "Or infamous, depending on who you ask." "I don't want to be famous," Clara said tiredly. "I just want justice for people who've been forgotten." "Too late for that. You've made yourself the face of this fight." He held up an editorial from the Times. "Listen to this. The Duchess of Blackmore has shown more moral courage in 6 months than most of our elected officials display in their entire careers. Her refusal to hide her family's crimes sets a new standard for aristocratic accountability." Clara made a face. "That's excessive. That's deserved." Adrian set down the paper. "You've changed things, Clara. Not just here, but everywhere. Parliament's talking about reforms to death investigations because of what you've exposed. Medical boards are reviewing physician oversight. You've started something that's bigger than just our family." "It doesn't feel big. It feels exhausting." Adrian studied her. "You're running yourself ragged. When's the last time you slept a full night?" "When's the last time you did?" Clara countered. "Fair point." He moved to the window, looking out at the cliffs that had claimed so many lives. "I've been thinking about Isabel lately, about what she'd say if she could see what you've accomplished. She'd probably tell me I'm being reckless." "No," Adrian said softly. "She'd tell you she's proud, that someone finally did what she couldn't, fought back and won." Clara felt her throat tighten. "I wish I could have known her. I wish I'd known her better myself, really known her, not just the version of her I was allowed to see." Adrian turned from the window. "I've been a coward most of my life, Clara. Easier to let my grandfather make decisions, to trust Dr. Reeves's medical opinions, to believe Mrs. Graves's reports. I never questioned anything because questioning meant responsibility, and responsibility meant risk. And now I understand that not questioning, that passive acceptance, that's the real risk. That's how evil flourishes." His expression was raw. "I can't change the past, can't bring back the people my grandfather killed, but I can make damn sure it never happens again." Before Clara could respond, Mary appeared in the doorway, her face flushed with excitement. "Your Graces, there's a delegation from the village. They're asking to speak with you both." Clara and Adrian exchanged glances. This could be anything from an angry mob to a formal complaint. They found nearly 30 villagers gathered in the front hall: shopkeepers, farmers, the blacksmith, the baker. At their head stood old Thomas, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday best. "Your Graces," he began, twisting his cap in his hands, "we've come to say something that needs saying. When the scandal first broke, when all those stories came out about Lord Philip and the murders, well, we weren't sure what to think. Some folks said the new Duchess was stirring up trouble, making things worse." Clara's heart sank. Here it comes, she thought. The formal request that we leave. "But we've been watching," Thomas continued, "watching how you've handled things. The clinic you opened. My granddaughter was treated there last week, saved her life when the fever got bad. The school you started, my neighbor's daughter is learning to read. The compensation fund," his voice cracked. "My own nephew who died 10 years ago, you found his name in those records. You sent his mother money and an apology. A real apology, not some legal document, but a letter in your own hand saying you were sorry for what your family did." He looked around at the gathered villagers who nodded encouragement. "What we're trying to say is, we were wrong. You're not stirring up trouble. You're cleaning up a mess that's been poisoning this whole area for generations. And we want you to know we stand with you. Whatever you need, however we can help, you've got our support." The baker stepped forward, pressing a warm loaf into Clara's hands. "Made fresh this morning, Your Grace. It's not much, but it's everything," Clara said, her voice thick. "Thank you, all of you." "There's more," the blacksmith added. "We've been talking among ourselves. Some of the neighboring estates, they've got their own dark histories. Things people whisper about but never say out loud. We figure if anyone can bring light to those shadows, it's you. So if you're willing..." "We'd be honored to help," Adrian said, finding his voice. "Whatever you need, we're here." After the villagers left, each of them shaking Clara and Adrian's hands, some with tears in their eyes, Clara sank onto the stairs, still clutching the bread. "I thought they hated us," she said wonderingly. "They did, until they saw what you were actually trying to do." Adrian sat beside her. "You've given them hope, Clara. Proof that the powerful can be held accountable. That truth matters more than reputation. We gave them hope, Clara corrected. You could have fought me on every reform, could have insisted we bury the evidence and move on. But you didn't. Because you were right. You're annoyingly, consistently right. Adrian managed a tired smile. It's becoming a problem, actually. Makes it very difficult for me to maintain my dignity as the Duke, when my wife is clearly the competent one. Clara laughed, the first real laugh she'd managed in weeks. Your dignity is overrated anyway. Harsh, but fair. They sat in comfortable silence, the enormity of what they'd accomplished settling over them. It wasn't finished. There were still investigations ongoing, still families waiting for answers, still reforms to fight for. But for the first time since Clara had arrived at this cursed house, she felt like they were winning. 3 months later, Clara stood in the west wing of Blackmore Manor, surveying the memorial she'd created. The walls were lined with photographs and names, every person Lord Philip had killed or ordered killed, their stories told in careful detail. Isabel's portrait held pride of place, her gentle face watching over all the others. The official dedication ceremony was scheduled for the afternoon. The magistrate would be there, along with victims' families, members of parliament, and journalists from every major publication. Clara smoothed her black dress, mourning colors, deliberately chosen, and felt Adrian's hand on her shoulder. "Ready?" he asked. "No, but we're doing it anyway." The ceremony was somber but powerful. Clara spoke about the importance of truth, of refusing to let the past be sanitized for the comfort of the present. Adrian spoke about his grandfather's crimes and his own failure to see what was happening. Together, they unveiled a plaque that read, "In memory of those who died so that others might profit, may their deaths serve as warning against unchecked power and willing blindness." Catherine Wells, whose brother Thomas had been one of the first victims, stepped forward to place flowers at the memorial. One by one, other families followed until the floor was covered in blooms. "This means something," Catherine said, gripping Clara's hands afterward. "Not just for us, but for everyone who's ever been told their grief doesn't matter. Their questions are inconvenient. You've shown that the truth can't be buried forever." That evening, after the guests had departed and the house had fallen quiet, Clara found herself back in the memorial room. She stood before Isabel's portrait, studying the face of the woman who'd tried to fight and paid with her life. "I hope this is what you wanted," Clara said softly. "I hope wherever you are, you know someone finally listened." She felt rather than heard Adrian enter the room. He came to stand beside her, looking up at his first wife's portrait. "I failed her," he said simply. "No matter how many times you tell me it wasn't my fault, that truth remains. I had the power to protect her, and I didn't use it." "So use it now," Clara said. "Protect the people who need protecting. Fight for those who can't fight for themselves. That's how you honor her memory." "Is that what you're doing? Fighting for people who can't fight for themselves?" Clara thought about all the families she'd met, all the stories she'd heard. "I'm fighting because someone has to, because I refuse to be another forgotten victim, and because—" She paused, surprised by the truth of what she was about to say. "Because this place, this horrible house full of ghosts, has become my home, and I'll be damned if I let its history of cruelty be its only legacy." Adrian turned to look at her fully. In the months since the trials, he'd changed. The cold remoteness had been replaced by something warmer, more human. Lines had appeared around his eyes, from stress, yes, but also from laughter. From the long nights they spent planning reforms, arguing about strategy, building something neither of them had expected. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Something I should have said months ago." Clara's pulse quickened. "What?" "I've fallen in love with you." The words hung in the air between them. Clara's breath caught. "Adrian, let me finish, please." He took her hands, his grip warm and steady. "I know this started as a transaction, a marriage of convenience to solve both our problems. And I know I treated you terribly in the beginning, kept you at a distance, refused to see you as anything but an obligation. But Clara, you're the bravest person I've ever met, the most stubborn, infuriating, brilliant person. And somewhere between you killing my housekeeper and reorganizing my entire estate, I fell completely, hopelessly in love with you." Clara felt tears prickling her eyes. That might be the least romantic love confession in history. "I know. I'm terrible at this." Adrian smiled helplessly. But it's true. And I understand if you don't feel the same way. If you want to maintain the partnership we've built without complicating it with emotions. I just needed you to know. Clara kissed him. It was clumsy and unpracticed. Neither of them had much experience with genuine affection, but it was real. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian looked stunned. I love you too, Clara said. I didn't mean to, didn't plan on it, but you changed, became someone worth loving, someone who fights beside me instead of trying to control me. So yes, Your Grace, I love you, even though you're still occasionally insufferable. Only occasionally, don't push your luck. He laughed and pulled her close, and for a moment they just held each other in the memorial room, surrounded by the dead they'd honored and the truths they'd uncovered. What do we do now? Adrian asked eventually. We keep going, Clara said. Keep fighting, keep reforming, keep making this estate into something worthy of respect instead of fear. And us? What about us? Clara pulled back to look at him. We figure it out as we go. Build something real from the wreckage. Make this marriage into a partnership of equals in every way. I'd like that, Adrian said softly. More than I can say. 6 months later, Clara stood in what had once been the formal gardens, now transformed into public grounds where villagers could walk freely. She'd commissioned the redesign herself, removing the pretentious statuary and rigid hedges in favor of wildflower meadows and winding paths. Children played near the fountain while their mothers chatted on newly installed benches. Clara watched them, her hand resting on her slightly rounded stomach. She was pregnant. The discovery had terrified her at first, not the pregnancy itself, but what it represented. Lord Philip had wanted an heir, had arranged her marriage specifically to produce one. The thought of giving him what he'd wanted, even posthumously, had made her sick. But Adrian had taken her face in his hands and said firmly, "This child isn't his victory. This is ours. Our family, built on love and choice, not manipulation and murder. Don't let him poison this too." He'd been right. This baby, their baby, was a beginning, not a continuation of the old toxic legacy. Clara felt arms wrap around her from behind, Adrian's chin resting on her shoulder. "Penny for your thoughts?" he murmured. "Thinking about how far we've come. How different things are now. Better or worse?" "Better. Terrifyingly better." Clara leaned back against him. "I'm scared, Adrian, scared I'll be a terrible mother, scared I'll fail this child the way my parents failed me, the way my grandfather corrupted everything he touched." Adrian turned her gently to face him. "You won't, because you're incapable of doing things halfway. You'll fight for this child the way you fought for everything else, fiercely, stubbornly, with complete disregard for anyone who tells you it can't be done." "What if that's not enough?" "Then we'll figure it out together. That's what partners do." Clara managed a smile. "When did you become so wise?" "When I married a woman who refuses to let me wallow in self-pity." Adrian kissed her forehead. "Come on. The school dedication starts in an hour. Mary will have my head if we're late." The girls' school had been Clara's passion project, a proper academy where daughters of farmers and shopkeepers could receive the same education as the gentry. The local establishment had fought her every step, claiming it was wasteful, dangerous, that educating women above their station would lead to chaos. Clara had ignored them and forged ahead anyway. Now, watching 60 girls of various ages file into the newly completed building, their faces bright with excitement and possibility, Clara felt a fierce pride. "My mother would have loved this," she said softly. "She always said education was the one thing no one could take from you." She was right. Adrian squeezed her hand. "And she'd be proud of you, for surviving, for building something extraordinary from the worst circumstances." The headmistress, a formidable woman from Cambridge, called the assembly to order. Clara gave a short speech about the importance of knowledge and independence, carefully not mentioning that she'd been sold into marriage specifically because she lacked both. But the girls understood anyway. She could see it in their faces, the recognition that she'd fought for them because she knew what it meant to be powerless, to have choices taken away. "You have the chance to be different," Clara told them, "to build lives based on your own choices, your own talents. Don't waste it, and don't let anyone tell you your dreams are too big or too ambitious. Fight for them." The applause was thunderous. That night, lying in bed, their bed now, the separate rooms abandoned months ago, Clara stared at the ceiling and took stock. She'd survived 2 murder attempts, killed in self-defense, exposed decades of corruption, and transformed one of England's most notorious estates into a model of progressive reform. She'd turned a marriage of convenience into genuine partnership and love. She'd created a memorial for forgotten victims and established institutions that would serve the community for generations. And she was about to become a mother. It was terrifying and exhilarating and utterly surreal. "Can't sleep?" Adrian asked, his voice rough with drowsiness. "Too much thinking." "About what?" "Everything, nothing, whether we're actually going to pull this off." "Pull what off?" "This. Us. Building something good from so much ugliness. Raising a child who won't inherit our trauma." Adrian rolled to face her, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "We're already pulling it off. Look at what we've accomplished, the lives we've changed. But what if it's not enough? What if—" "Clara." His voice was firm but gentle. "Stop catastrophizing. We'll make mistakes. We'll probably fail at some things. But we'll do it together, and we'll learn, and we'll keep fighting. That's all we can do." Clara turned to look at him, his face barely visible in the moonlight filtering through the curtains. "How did we get here?" she asked. "From that first awful meeting to this? You refused to give up. On yourself, on me, on the possibility that things could be better." Adrian's thumb traced circles on her palm. "I was a coward who'd accepted that coldness and distance were the price of safety. You showed me that real safety comes from trust and partnership, from letting people in instead of keeping them out." "I didn't have much choice. It was adapt or die. You had every choice. You could have run, could have accepted the annulment I offered, could have taken the settlement and started fresh somewhere else. But you stayed, you fought, and you changed everything." Clara felt tears slipping down her temples. "I'm still scared." "Good. Fear means you care, means you understand the stakes." Adrian pulled her closer. "But you're not alone in this. Whatever comes, we face it together." Clara tucked herself against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, steady, reliable, real. This man who'd been a stranger, then an adversary, then a partner, and finally her love. "Together," she agreed. The baby was born on a spring morning, crying lustily as rain hammered the windows. A daughter, red-faced and furious and absolutely perfect. Clara held her, exhausted and overwhelmed, and felt Adrian's hand trembling on her shoulder. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "She's wrinkled and angry." "Like her mother, then?" Clara laughed weakly. "What should we name her?" They discussed this, but never settled on anything. Now, holding this tiny human they'd created, Clara knew exactly what felt right. "Isabel," she said, "after the woman who tried to fight, who deserves to be remembered for more than how she died." Adrian's breath caught. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. She'll have her own identity, her own life. But she'll carry Isabel's name as a reminder that some fights are worth having, even when they're difficult." "Isabel it is, then." Adrian kissed Clara's forehead, then leaned down to brush a gentle finger against the baby's cheek. "Welcome to the world, Isabel Blackmore. Try not to be too much like your mother. One revolutionary per generation is quite enough." "She'll be worse," Clara predicted. "She'll have both of us as examples. Poor thing won't stand a chance at being conventional." "I'm counting on it." They sat together in the early morning light, their daughter sleeping in Clara's arms, and Clara felt something settle in her chest. Not the absence of fear, she was still terrified of 1,000 things, but the presence of certainty. They would be all right. Not perfect, not undamaged, but all right. And that was enough. Years later, Clara would stand at the cliffs with Isabel, now 10 years old and every bit as stubborn as her mother, and tell her the full story. How her grandmother had died here, murdered for being inconvenient. How Clara herself had killed in self-defense on these same rocks. How blood and violence had soaked this place for generations. "But that's not all it is," Clara would say, watching the waves crash below. "It's also where I learned to fight, where I found my strength, where I decided that survival wasn't enough. I wanted justice." "Were you scared?" Isabel would ask. "Terrified. Every day. But you did it anyway. Because being scared and being brave aren't opposites. They're partners. You can be both at the same time. Isabel would nod seriously, absorbing this, and Clara would see so much of herself in that fierce young face, but also Adrian's steadiness, and something entirely new, the confidence of a child raised to question authority, to fight for justice, to never accept that wrong things must be tolerated simply because they're traditional. But that was years in the future. For now, Clara held her newborn daughter and felt Adrian's solid presence beside her, and let herself believe in the possibility of happiness earned through survival and struggle. The house that had been a tomb was now a home. The marriage that began as a transaction had become love. The legacy of murder and cruelty was being transformed, one reform at a time, into something that served life instead of death. Outside, the rain was easing. Weak sunlight broke through the clouds, streaming through the windows, casting everything in gold. Clara looked at Adrian, at Isabel, at the life they were building together from the ruins of the past. "We did it," she said softly. "We actually did it." "No," Adrian corrected, his voice full of wonder and gratitude. "You did it. You refused to be destroyed, and you built something extraordinary instead. I just had the good fortune to stand beside you while you changed the world." Clara smiled, tired and happy and more certain than she'd ever been. "We changed it together," she said, "and we're not finished yet, because there was still work to do, still families seeking justice, still systems to reform, still entrenched powers to challenge." But now she had allies. Adrian, the villagers, the growing network of reformers who'd been inspired by what she'd accomplished at Blackmore. She had a daughter who would grow up knowing her mother had fought and won. And she had herself, tempered by fire, strengthened by struggle, no longer the frightened girl who'd arrived at this house expecting to die quietly. Clara Blackmore, the duchess who'd killed a murderer and exposed decades of corruption, who'd turned a cursed estate into a beacon of reform, who'd proved that even the darkest legacies could be overcome by courage and relentless determination. She'd started as a desperate bargain for survival. She'd become something far more powerful, a woman who refused to be silenced, who fought for justice even when it cost her everything, who transformed weakness into strength and fear into fury. And in the end, that made all the difference.